It started on a quiet morning, just after the rain had settled into thick puddles along the edge of the town square. The roads were still wet, the kind of slick mud that clings to everything. A simple woman, Maria, stood near the bus stop, holding 2 bags of groceries, her clothes slightly damp, hair tied back in a frayed scarf. She wasn't doing anything but waiting, maybe thinking about getting home before the eggs cracked. That's when a sleek black SUV turned the corner, fast, too fast. Without even slowing down, the driver, clearly someone with more money than Manners, sped through the puddle, sending a wave of cold, dirty mud across the sidewalk. It hit Maria full on. Groceries dropped, eggs cracked. A splash of brown streaked across her face and clothes. The SUV didn't stop, didn't even hesitate, just kept rolling, tires hissing against the wet pavement. Inside the SUV was a woman, dressed head to toe in designer brands, pearls, heels, sunglasses too big for her face. One quick glance in the rearview mirror, and she smirked. To her, Maria wasn't someone worth noticing, just another nobody in the wrong place at the wrong time. What she didn't realize, though, was that someone else saw everything. Someone who didn't appreciate cruelty, no matter how rich you were. And that someone wasn't just any bystander. They had the power to make things right. What happened next would turn that muddy moment into something the rich woman would never. Forget Maria stood frozen for a second, heart racing, her soaked blouse clinging to her skin. She bent down quietly to gather the groceries, even though most of them were ruined. People nearby had seen it happen, but nobody stepped forward. Maybe they didn't want to get involved, or maybe they too had learned to expect that kind of behavior from people like her. The woman in the SUV, her name was Celeste. She lived in the gated community just up the hill, where gardeners trimmed hedges twice a week and packages from luxury brands piled at the doorstep like ordinary mail. Celeste was known in town, not because she was kind or helpful, but because she made herself known. Loud at the cafe, demanding in boutiques, dismissive of anyone she considered beneath her. To her, Maria was invisible, but Maria wasn't just anyone. And this wasn't the first time Celeste had treated someone like dirt unseen by both of them. A man in a dark gray coat had witnessed the entire thing from across the street. He wasn't flashy, didn't say a word, just quietly watched as Maria wiped her face and straightened her back. His eyes followed the SUV until it vanished behind the trees. Then he reached into his coat pocket and made a call. Not to gossip. Not to complain, to act, because what Celeste didn't know was that the person she humiliated had a quiet connection to someone very important. And her little splash of mud was about to stir up something much bigger. Later that day, Maria returned to her small home on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She quietly washed her clothes by hand and laid them out to dry, the sting of the morning still fresh. She didn't tell anyone, not her neighbors, not even her sister who called every evening. Maria was used to being overlooked. But this time, something in her chest felt different. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was something deeper, like the last bit of patience had finally cracked. Meanwhile, the man in the gray coat, his name was Daniel, was sitting in a quiet office above the town's legal aid center. On the wall behind him were faded photos from community events, many of them featuring Maria helping serve food or passing out blankets during winter drives. What Celeste didn't know was that Maria had spent years volunteering, quietly giving back without ever asking for anything. And Daniel? He was the head of a local foundation that had helped protect small business owners and residents from being bullied by people just like Celeste. As Daniel made calls and gathered statements from nearby shopkeepers, a second story started to unfold. This wasn't Celeste's first offense. A florist had once caught her yelling at a delivery driver. The town librarian mentioned she'd tried to get a teenager fired over a late return. The pattern was clear. This wasn't about a puddle. It was about power. And someone finally noticing what she'd done when she thought no one was watching 2 days later, an invitation slipped into Celeste's gated mailbox, embossed with gold trim addressed directly to her. It read, "You are cordially invited to attend a private recognition ceremony honoring community service in Willow Glen." Celeste, flattered and intrigued, assumed her reputation and wealth had finally earned her the kind of spotlight she always believed she deserved. She picked out her most elegant outfit, hired a driver, and arrived fashionably late, as usual. The venue was the town's cultural center, with cameras set up, guests mingling, and news reporters quietly setting up along the back wall. Celeste made her entrance confidently, chin high, heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. What she didn't notice right away was that most of the room wasn't looking at her. They were already focused on someone else standing at the front. Maria dressed simply, but with dignity. Maria stood beside Daniel, who was giving a quiet speech about unseen heroes in the community. Celeste's confident smile flickered. Something wasn't adding up. She tried to take a seat in the front row, but someone gently redirected her to the back. No reserved seats this time, as the room filled with applause for Maria's years of service. Celeste sat frozen, unsure if anyone had even noticed her arrival. But they had. And just as Daniel nodded to a screen for a short video tribute, a familiar clip began to play. Surveillance footage from the cafe corner showing that exact splash of mud, in full color, slowed down for everyone to see. The room went quiet. You could hear a pin drop. As the muddy water in the slow-motion clip splashed across Maria's face, gasps rippled through the audience. Celeste's expression shifted from confusion to horror. She recognized the clip instantly, and more importantly, she realized everyone else did too. Her name wasn't mentioned, but the SUV's vanity plate, clearly visible in the footage, said it all. But just when Celeste thought the worst of her humiliation had played out, Daniel stepped forward again. He calmly addressed the crowd, thanking local businesses for submitting footage and statements. "Sometimes," he said, "acts of unkindness happen quietly, but when people speak up, the truth becomes louder than silence." The audience applauded. Celeste sat stiffly, face pale, wishing she could disappear. That's when the second twist landed. A woman in a neat blazer approached the podium, Melissa Hart, head of the town Zoning and Ethics Committee. She announced an initiative, a new program awarding community members with grants for starting small businesses, prioritizing those who faced injustice or hardship. The first recipient? Maria, but then Melissa added something else. "We've also opened an investigation into several ongoing complaints regarding resident conduct in Willow Glen's private communities." Celeste blinked, the words hitting harder than any splash of water. She realized this wasn't just public embarrassment. It was the beginning of a formal review of her status in the neighborhood. The power she'd clung to so tightly was starting to crack, and for the first time, she wasn't the one controlling the story. Celeste barely slept that night. By morning, her name was buzzing through local forums and small news outlets. People were sharing the video, not just because of the mud, but because of what it revealed. How someone so entitled could treat another human being with such disregard. Her public image, once polished and powerful, was now stained just like Maria's dress had been. And there was no cleaning it off. A week later, Maria stood outside a charming storefront in the center of town. A new sign hung in the window, "Maria's Corner Cafe, Community First." Funded by the grant announced during the ceremony, it was more than just a cafe. It would offer affordable meals, free job training workshops, and a place for locals to gather and support one another. Her quiet strength had become something the town rallied behind. As for Celeste, she received a formal letter from her HOA and the zoning committee. Her behavior had violated community conduct policies, and her privileges, golf club access, private events, and even her HOA voting rights, were temporarily suspended. But the real hit came from a different direction. At the next town council meeting, Celeste arrived hoping to speak in her defense. But sitting at the head of the table, as a newly invited advisory board member representing local residents, Maria Celeste froze. The same woman she had splashed with mud now held a seat of influence. Not through revenge, but through the community's choice. That was the final twist Celeste never saw coming. Celeste slowly sat in the back row of the council chamber, a seat she never imagined herself in. No spotlight, no recognition, just silence. Maria, now with a voice that carried real weight, spoke, gently but firmly, about fairness, respect, and the importance of small acts of kindness. She never once mentioned Celeste by name, never pointed fingers. Her message was bigger than one incident. It was about how communities thrive when dignity is shared, not bought. The town took notice. Maria's cafe became a gathering spot where stories were shared over warm cups of coffee, and volunteers dropped in to help. The once simple woman had become a quiet symbol of resilience, someone who rose not by fighting back in anger, but by standing tall with integrity. People began paying more attention, not just to Maria, but to how they treated each other. In everyday moments, Celeste, on the other hand, kept a lower profile.